Okay, hello everyone. I am so honored and humbled to be introducing you to Ganel-Lyn Condie. She is first and foremost a beautiful daughter of God. She is a wife, a mother, an author, a speaker. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, but you'll find out so much more about her as we discuss and chit chat. But I want to start from the very beginning, like right out of the chutes. Can you tell me, with this interview and with this recording, this video, what do you want people to come away with? What is your hope that people will take from what you want to share today?
That's a really great question. I wasn't thinking that's where you were going. So that's a really good question, and my heart and spirit light lit up when you asked it. So that's great. I think the most important thing is that at any point in our lives, if people were to step in and do a Netflix documentary, right, of exactly what's happening, I think it would be interesting to see who would say, oh, that's a successful person, that's not, and would have probably an opinion about how that person had created whatever we were watching unfold. But just like every documentary, that's a snapshot unless it's post-mortem, right? Like it's a snapshot of anyone's life. And so the most important takeaway that I want to share is that God is not panicked, and that your plan of happiness is on track. And so whether that means, like I am currently doing, I'm living a very public part of my mission on earth right now. But I very much see what I'm doing as a speaker, media contributor, talk show host, author, speaker, all those things as a snapshot of a phase or a season of my mission. And right now it feels like it's going to keep continuing. But I hope at the age of 80 or 90 or wherever I'm at, I will look back and see that whatever I'm doing then, it's perfectly woven into what's happening now. And that means wherever you're feeling nudges and promptings, God has already put in place connections and experiences for you so that you can be your most successful self. But what is success? So I think my biggest takeaway is that people will start to trust the unfolding of their mission. It doesn't mean we don't need to actively step forward and co-create with God, but I think it's really a stumbling block if we measure that based on some kind of measuring tool the world has, which is how many followers, how many books you sell, whatever that is. Because I can look back, and when I get asked every week, I mean literally every week I get asked, I want to do what you're doing, how do I do that? Every single week for the last probably 5 years, I've gotten at least a handful of those messages from people. And people don't like my answer. So I'm excited about our conversation today because I feel like I can really dive into beyond an email or a message on Messenger or a Twitter message and explain my heart, and my answers come from a place of really trusting God. Now, it doesn't mean I don't get snagged in comparisons and frustration. But if I was to explain where I am today, I'd have to go back and really explain stories and experiences and challenges and relationships that look like they have no connection to what's happening now. And yet, that's really my testimony that God, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your status is, He's orchestrating your highest self. And your highest self is taking into account all of your limitations, all of your strengths, your family dynamics, what's happening in the world. We're like recording this in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so he's got that. He's not like, oh gosh, I had a really great plan for Melinda, but she has so messed that up because of that one thing. And I'm not saying we don't make wrong turns. I'm just saying my biggest message is God is consecrating and creating with you the best mission. And that includes all the starts and stops, all the missteps, all the wrong turns, all of the heartbreaks, all of it.
That is awesome. One of my favorite titles for our Father in Heaven is the Great Choreographer, because what you just said is just absolute truth. And we all need to know that. Like you said, we might feel like we're hitting this brick wall, but He's got a plan. and we just
Yeah.
need to work with him. That's
Like right
awesome.
now, I'm releasing a brand new talk on CD, Stay. I recorded it last year. We've worked for months on it. Amazon's frozen all shipments of non-essentials. Deseret Book has gone completely down to a skeleton stock inventory in their stores. And this is, you know, all the book signings, all the promo stuff that's gone. My speaking calendar for the last 3 months was filled with some amazing opportunities that I've worked years to have, and they're all canceled, right? And so I can find myself going into fear of like, oh no, everything's being frustrated. Everything's not playing out. And so this conversation is a really good reminder, because my soul knows that, like you said, God's the great choreographer. He's the great architect. He's the great author. He's the great healer. He's the great orchestrator. He's the great conductor, right? He's all of those things. And so sometimes we think, well, when we look on YouTube or Instagram, we go, well, he did that for so-and-so, fill in the name, but he hasn't done it for me. And I don't believe that God sees any of us as small players in his play. You know, I think he very much sees that the mother in India right now that's trying to keep her family safe and healthy is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than someone in Washington, D.C. making decisions about vaccines, right? And so we, as his children that have very limited understanding, place value on each of those stewardships, right? We are the ones who say, this is of great worth, but this is not so much. The mom making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches today and trying to teach her child to read or get potty trained, that's not as important as the respiratory doctor up here who's trying to keep someone alive. And that's, I think at the end of our lives, when we really have a full understanding, we're going to see it so differently. We're going to see those sacred moments of that mom in her kitchen, and we're going to see it was so important and impactful, and it will not pale compared to this respiratory doctor in New York trying to keep someone alive.
I love that. And I love that you said stewardship. That's another one of my favorite words, because we have stewardship over every relationship in our life. It's so awesome.
And everything, our bodies, this phone, my house. We don't have ownership though. And that's where we get in trouble, because stewardship is very different than ownership. Right. And especially with kids, we can get into an ownership problem. I have a 22-year-old son. And if I'm not careful, his choices become an ownership instead of my relationship with him being a stewardship.
Right.
And that's tricky, because we often say in many books of scripture, we talk about a tree. There's a commonality of trees that show up in a lot of religions. And one of the things we talk about is the fruits of our labor, right? And so if we're not careful, we think the fruits of our labor is how many books we sell, how many paid speaking events we get, if we get a national television show, whatever that is, or we get this award, we graduate, our kids make these choices and they are successful a certain way, or our bodies look a certain way, right? And we think the fruits of our labor are this like result thing. And what I've really learned through wrestling with perfectionism, that the fruit of my labor, especially when the fruit looks bruised and smashed, like I was just telling a brother-in-law of mine who's in a really difficult situation right now, and I won't say too much more about it, but he's discouraged and he's worn out, and it's a situation that's gone on for a number of years, and it's heartbreaking. If I was at liberty to tell detail, your audience would agree that it's heartbreaking. And he's discouraged and he is feeling like, I'm done trying. And we were just talking about this morning, that the fruits of our labor is the offering. And when we get in trouble is when the stewardship and ownership shows up and we're judging the fruit. So if we're looking at our marriage, our bodies, our careers, whatever that is, our kids, and we're saying, that is a bruised, smashed, half-eaten banana. That is what I'm being judged on? Well, I'm in trouble, right? Instead of, what did we do? What was our offering? Did we plant the seed? Did we water it? Did we prune the bush? Did we whatever? Yes. So when the pestilence comes along or the animals come and pull the fruit off the tree and it gets smashed or rotten, we're often discouraged because we're like, that didn't turn out anything like I've put in effort. I mean, I was just reflecting on this today. This CD that's out, I'm like, wait, this isn't the way I wanted to release this CD, you know? And I had to surrender. I had to surrender that my offering was the recording, the decision on the cover, the giveaway I tried to do on Instagram last week, the posts I've tried to do, like all those are my offerings. But if I start to see sales numbers at the end of all this and only focus on the fruit being that, then I'm in ownership and I've stepped out of stewardship. My stewardship was the watch care, was the recording, was the sharing. And my stewardship is not controlling the harvest. And I think that is a message that most people, including myself, I've studied it for years. I have really made it a matter of prayer, and I still get hung up on it. And so I think that's, especially when we're talking about creation, right? And creating as parents or as entrepreneurs or as religious leaders, we have to stay in stewardship. When we go into ownership, that's when we are done for.
You know, and you said another word, you said effort. And I love the most recent conference. I love the quote, and I'm going to forget who shared it. I think it was Joy D. Jones. I'm not quite sure, but she said, the Lord loves effort. And that gives so much hope to all of us that are feeling like we're failing as parents or as everything. Right. Our effort counts, which is such hope, brings so much hope. In fact, so when I'm hearing you talk, I'm hearing like years of inspiration and study and pondering. That's what I'm assuming is happening to you, because you have so much, this wealth of knowledge, and I'm guessing it's from prayer and inspiration and so many different experiences. So I want to rewind back to young little Ganel-Lyn Condie, and I want to kind of share, like, let's talk about your beginning and then kind of how you got here. So can we start? In fact, I want to screen share and just share a couple of pictures here. Can you tell me about your childhood, where you grew up? Tell me about your cute little family.
Yeah.
And yeah, just go from there. I'll share a little picture here.
So I grew up in California, in Northern California, north of Sacramento. I was born in Sacramento, and my parents were, I'm the oldest, and my parents are divorced. And what you're seeing there are that's me and my sister Meg, and we were the fruits of their labor, so to speak. And when they divorced, they worked really hard to stay friends, but when they were divorced, not very many people within our church were divorced. So I remember going to primary with being one of the very few that had a dad that didn't live with them. And I think that played into a lot of things in my life. It played into some situations for both my sister Meg and I. My mom was a working mom. We saw our dad on weekends. My sister became victim to some sexual abuse by a babysitter. And that played into a story that continued to unfold. We didn't obviously know at the time what was happening. And I loved growing up in California. I loved that at the time, we lived in an all-Black neighborhood. My mom was a single mom. The only other Caucasian family were the gay couple across the street. And so if that tells you anything about me, if I could only tell you one story, that probably explains all of who I am. Because I grew up really from the beginning loving all of God's children right where they're at, and really comfortable with the fact that you can believe how you believe, and I passionately believe the way I believe, and we bless each other by being connected. And so that diversity growing up really has served me. And I think from a young age, it created in me a comfort around uncomfortable situations socially. And it created in me an ability to have those awkward conversations that I think as a speaker, that's what I most often hear as feedback, is that I'm willing to talk about some of those uncomfortable topics in our society, in our religion, in a way. And I think it comes from those early experiences as a kid that, you know, all of my friends were of African-American identity. And I was their token Mormon friend that went to church we had primary on Thursdays. I'm almost 50. So I remember feeling like, you know, I lived through the priesthood being restored to all people of all colors, but I remember before that. I mean, that's how old I am, is I remember wanting to bring all of my Black friends to church with me, and many of them had parents that said, you can't go there. And so I lived through that. And then my mom eventually remarried my stepfather, who they are still married. And we call him Daddy Jim. We call my dad Daddy Dan. My mom and my dad have worked really hard to navigate divorce and have stayed respectful and loving to each other. They very much see each other as brother and sister in the gospel.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that, because my father eventually remarried as well and had his whole family. My mom and my stepdad had their whole family. And I'm the oldest of all of them. So I don't have steps, I have a lot of halves. And my only full-blooded sibling was my sister Meg. And I feel like we, as a blended family, it's interesting because I have siblings on both sides that are the same age as each other. So I have two sets of sisters that are the same age, and a set of brothers that are the same age. And these kids call my mom Auntie Larry or Mama Larry, and our families, it's funny, these sisters and brothers have a bond because the commonality really wasn't anything other than Meg and I. And so I share that because I think there's a lot of listeners out there that divorce is messy and hard, and it is. My father is now single and divorced, but I still, those siblings are mine. And in many ways, I saw myself as the oldest child, but more as the mom. And my mom has struggled with some major things in her life with mental health stuff, and she's very open about that. And so I very much saw myself as kind of the caregiver of both my mom and my sister. And my dad and mom, my stepdad and my mom had their first baby together, and she passed. And so my sister Bonnie was almost 2 when she died. And then in that process, my dad had remarried and they started their family. So I'm kind of the oldest of a lot of kids. And that was also a blessing, but challenging. You know, my mom and dad worked to navigate that divorce process, but it can be challenging. And I often tell families that are going through this that it's more, when there's a remarriage, it's more people to love you. And it's really important to not shame the other parent because your kids are half them. But it was a challenging growing up time for me. There was mental health issues at home, and there were things happening and unraveling that I didn't know till later the context. Like, we didn't understand why my sister with learning disabilities and some other issues were having those issues until she was a teenager, and then we found out about the sexual abuse. And you know, there were challenges and there were issues like most families. And I think mistakenly around the age of 7, I had a very clear understanding, somewhat for a young child, of what my mission was going to be. And I misinterpreted that revelation, so to speak. So I guess what the simplest way to describe it is, I felt for a moment Heavenly Father made sure I could see what I came to earth to do. And as a young child, I took that vision or that understanding and I twisted it in my head to mean that I had to be perfect. And so I was very clear that I had come to earth to do some big things. And so in my head, that meant for me, I have to save everyone I love and I have to be perfect. And that played out into my life in various ways, just like all of us. The older you get, hopefully we become wiser, and wisdom is more knowledge and experience. And so as I looked back, I realized that put inside of my soul this misunderstanding, and it's taken a lot of years on working that through. And fast forward, I was the oldest. So I was the first to go to college. I was the first to leave home and get married, and no one was ahead of me on the trail on that. And I was determined I think like many firstborns, to change patterns that I had seen that I felt like were dysfunctional and not healthy. And I always tell my kids, you're going to go to therapy and you're going to fix things that Dad and I did. That's the progression of healing our families, right? And I married a wonderful guy that came from a very different background. He came from no divorces at all in his family. There's our cute family right now. That was just taken in the fall. And my daughter is 16, Brooklyn.
So cute.
Yeah, my daughter is amazing. I tell her all the time I'd be her friend if I wasn't her mom.
Cute.
And my son is 22. He's amazing. He's been home from his mission in Zimbabwe over a year now. He came home and is navigating that post-mission life, which is somewhat treacherous and challenging, and especially during this time when we have so many young single adults trying to figure out being sent home early from missions and all of that. So we got married and really very much had mapped out how we thought life would be, and nothing has gone the way we thought. We came from a family where there was no divorces. President Monson is our cousin. Spencer J. Condie, the General Authority Emeritus status, is our close family. And you know, I came from a long line of divorce, and in our family we argued, in his family they pushed it under the rug. And maybe some families can relate to this, that we've had to learn to create our own healthy norm. It took 7 years to have that 6'7" boy right there. He's very tall, and my husband's 6'3". So you can see in that picture even that my husband is shorter than his son. And we took a while to get that boy because the doctor said I would have none. I have a heart condition and been diagnosed with lupus and have spent years on and off various medications, including chemotherapy. And the doctors just early on after my diagnosis said having children was just not going to happen. And in our faith, we have something called the patriarchal blessing that you get. And mine said very clearly that I would be a mother in Zion of children. And so I knew in some way we would become parents, and I didn't know what that would look like. And it took 7 years to have that boy. And I'm so grateful that we've been able to become parents. It took 6 years to have our daughter. And it's so funny what people say when they don't, I don't know if they realize they're being rude or not, but we could write a book on just the funny comments people make, especially about infertility and
what not to say.
And what not to say. One of my classic ones is people say, so you guys just aren't into kids? And we would laugh and say, yeah, we're in. At the time we had rescued a little Yorkie that had been abused. So we would jokingly say, yeah, we're into rare dogs. Or I started to come up with funny things to say in return because it's just awkward what people say. So I would say to people, well, I'm just not into kids, and I have a teaching degree. So that was just hilarious. And my other favorite one is, well, we want to have a lot of money, and kids cost a lot of money. But it's funny, people would often say, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? They're 6 years apart. And I would think, well, what do you mean? What am I going to do? I'm not trying to do it this way. This is the way it's happening. And I love their relationship. They are fiercely loyal and kind and bonded to each other, to the point that people stop us in public, even before my son left on his mission, to say, are they siblings or what's going on? Because he's so tall. And their relationship is so tender and sweet. So the 6 year gap
doesn't matter.
And I think from just from a very specific full spectrum perspective of me, I always wanted to be a mom and a wife. I mean, that is just as much top of my dream list as some of the other things I'm living right now. And probably the most important. I wouldn't say probably, it absolutely is. And I think that comes from my childhood experience, that for me, the stewardship of being a wife and a mother is what I feel the most accountable for. And I think like most women out there that are working and juggling their dreams and their passions and their family, there have been good chunks of time where it didn't look very balanced, right? It was very much about, I had fought for 7 years to have that boy. I was not going to be distracted. But then there was a part of my soul that wasn't getting attention, and balancing that and navigating that. And then you add on top of their chronic illness, I had health stuff that I was always, that to me is another stewardship assignment. And so learning what my body needs and what I needed to do to care for this body so that I could be a wife and mom. And there were always these little dreams and impressions, if you recall from my 7-year-old experience, where I knew I had a mission that was beyond just the walls of my home. But I never, my biggest fear has always been that I didn't want to sacrifice one for the other.
Right.
And I feel really grateful that when people ask, how can you do all this? And they don't know the stuff I say no to, so that I can say yes to my health and I can say yes to my family. But I also know that I'm a better wife and mother because I have chosen to create with God and live a very big mission. And so I think they go hand in hand, and it doesn't always work. It doesn't always feel, the last 3.5 weeks have been 100% about family, and I watch my calendar empty and I'm trying to navigate that. And I can see what a gift it is that there is this part of me that wants to do these other things. And so maybe for you, it's not speaking or writing or doing live TV and radio like it is for me. Maybe for you, it's another creation that you are pondering on. But for me, family, and especially from what I came from growing up, I don't want to fail at this stewardship. This stewardship for me is so crucial. And I fought hard. I fought with literally my life to bring children to earth. And I take it serious. But I will say that my kids are older now, and they can reflect back, and I'm watching both of them do things that they literally will say to me is because they've watched me do things that I had never done, that scared me. And they watched me write a book when I had never written a book, or do some of the things I've done, and it's inspiring them to do their missions. And so that's been really rewarding I would say the last couple of years, and especially my son, as he tries to figure out what his major is, what his career is, and he's dating and making decisions about his life. He's done some things that he credits watching me do things that I didn't know how to do, but I tried them. And it's influencing him in doing the same in his life. And I think, gosh, what if I had pushed some of those promptings aside or those dreams aside because I was afraid that if I explored them, it would take away from my family, not realizing that in many ways, it's encouraging them to do what they came to earth to do. So I had these things, but I had these dreams. Like I wanted to be Oprah. I used to, as a little girl, I watched the Today Show more than I watched cartoons. I would have watched news all day long and talk shows all day long as a little kid. If there were cable shows and YouTube at the time, that's what I would have done. Because I know as a kid that other people's stories and talking and commentating about what was happening in the world is the thing that lights my spirit up more than anything else. And so that was always there. And I could never, my dad used to always say, you'd be a great salesman. I'm not a salesman, but if you want me to sell anything, it's faith. I will sell faith any day of the week. And because of where I grew up and being kind of the token member of my religion, I was exposed to a lot of different faiths. And I had to know what my faith was because I was usually the only one in the room that had that faith. And I would get asked questions. And I feel like all of that contributed to what I'm doing now. And then 6 years ago, something significant happened in my life. So I kind of skipped over a few things I did. As my kids got a little bit older, I worked with a regional magazine called Wasatch Women Magazine. And I had some amazing opportunities there. Studio 5, which is a local TV show, was just starting out the year the magazine came out, and I was a monthly contributor there. I had interviewed Cokie Roberts and the governor and Ronald Reagan's son, and I had these amazing opportunities through the magazine while still juggling a young family. And then the magazine was sold and bought, and I thought I was out of a job, and they offered me the managing editor position. And eventually one day I'm sitting in the temple, and I had gotten some promotions, and I had put out pretty good issues of the magazine. And this is before Facebook was just kind of brand spanking new, and no Instagram. And we were really trying to create what communities you now see on social media. That's what the magazine was motivated to do. It was about connecting women, especially along the Wasatch Front, from all different walks of profession, religion, and life, and create community and represent women, which is now happening on social media platforms. But this was our attempt on the glossy magazine side of things. And I remember I had had a few promotions and things were going well. I sat on some advisory boards with some pretty big names, and I was a stay-at-home mom. So this is also where telecommuting was kind of brand new. And so I would take my daughter to preschool 2 days a week, and I'd run into the newspaper office because we were owned by Media One, which owns the Tribune, used to own all the newspapers. And telecommuting was new. And so the sales team were selling ad space for a magazine, but never seeing the editor in the office. So I was juggling all of that. And looking back, I'm thinking, how did I do it? And it took a toll, but it was still one of those times where I prayed to God when I got offered the position, and I wasn't sure, because previous to it being bought, it was being run by 4 women, and I was PR director and I was a columnist, but we were sitting at a kitchen table running it. And now corporate America had bought this successful regional magazine, and then offering me my dream job. Like in journalism, like managing editor of a regional magazine is a dream position. And I had majored in elementary ed with a minor in psychology. And so I was juggling this, and I remember going to God and really wrestling and getting a blessing, going to the temple, and the answer was I could say yes or I could say no. I hate those answers, but I said yes. And I did it for quite a few months, and I felt like we would do check-ins as a family, and everyone was handling mom working pretty well. My husband is a CFO, he's a CPA, and he was running a company that was a very demanding career as well. And then one day we were in the temple, and it was very clear the Lord said it's time to quit. And he showed me who was supposed to replace me and all of her qualifications. And I didn't really know her. She had written for me a few times for the magazine. And I didn't tell my husband until we got in the car to go home, because I knew it would be a long conversation. And fast forward, I quit. And I remember when I gave my notice, my boss at the magazine said, no, like, what can we do? And he started making all these counter offers. And finally, because he was a member of the same faith as mine, I could say to him, I was in the temple, and he was like, like he knew he couldn't argue with that. And I quit, and I didn't know why God was having me quit. Here I had worked, and I could see where everything had kind of been put into place perfectly. Like, this is it. I get to be the Oprah of the magazine world, and I get to do some TV, and I get to, have all these and still be a mom. And I remember when I told our family, my kids, that I was quitting, my son was like, why? And I said, listen, someday, hopefully you'll serve a mission for God, and he'll ask you to come home. And you may not feel ready, but he sees around the corner, and I don't know why he's asking me to quit, but he's asking me to quit. So I'm going to trust him. And I share that because we often talk and interview successful people, and we don't talk about the no's, the walking away, the choosing out that we need to do along the way. And all I knew was it was God saying to quit. So I did. And for the next year, I kind of healed and regrouped and addressed some things. My friend that I had met doing the magazine, she had quit as well. And so we started a little marketing firm. And then it was clear within a year my son needed a course correction. He needed homeschooling for a year. And a lot of parents that are watching this are doing homeschooling now because of the COVID-19 crisis. But even with a teaching degree, that was probably way harder than running a magazine. Having a 13-year-old teenage boy home to homeschool is not an easy gig. And it was an emotional time for both of us, but I can see where it was a course correction for him and a healing time. And from that experience, it was a challenging experience for me. I felt like it was once again God directing it, and I didn't know how to do it. And I think of Noah, I think of Nephi in the Book of Mormon, where I felt like I was told to build a ship, but didn't have Pinterest shipbuilding plans. And so I relied on going to the Lord a lot, crying in my closet every day, frustrated because I didn't know how to help him and help me. And I walked away from this part of me that was this really cool identity part of me, this creation part of me that felt important. And because of his age, the things he was struggling with, I was keeping private for him. And I felt like through that whole experience, I had some trusted friends that I would share my hard days with, but overall it was private. And I remember thinking, if I just knew one other mother that was doing what I'm trying to do, it would feel so different. And from that, the Lord started to say to me, it's going to make me emotional. I tell this story a lot, but for some reason, someone I feel like is hearing it and needs to hear this. God was very clear to write my first book. And I argued with him. He told me the title, which was the title that it was eventually published, I Can Do Hard Things with God. And I argued with him. I was like, I'm not a writer. I didn't get a journalism degree. I know how to be a great magazine editor and send all of my articles to editors, right? But I didn't see myself as a book writer. And I also argued with him because I was like, do you see how many books are on Amazon? Like, nobody needs another book. Nobody needs another book. And the impression wouldn't leave, the title wouldn't leave. And I knew it was going to be a compilation of stories, addressing the hard things, including the one we had lived through. So all of a sudden, my husband lost his job. And this was one of those economic downturns that I think we're now going to be experiencing. But our family went through it. We lost a lot of money on our house. We sold everything and started over. But during that time, he was home to help with carpool. My son had homeschooled for a year, and then he went back to school, to a private school that was quite a ways from our home. And I all of a sudden had time. So I worked over a 7-month period of time. I had never written a book. It was very different than writing a magazine and putting a magazine out every other month. And I finished the manuscript, and it was a compilation of stories that were different hard things, infertility, chronic illness. And I had written it in a format that interwove my stories because I felt like I had lived all of the book, but I wanted to share from different perspectives. Anyways, I finished the manuscript and shopped it around. I submitted it to 2 publishers and got 2 rejections. And I was almost going to give up. And my friend is Richard Paul Evans. He wrote the foreword to what was published, which was I Can Do Hard Things with God. And at the time, he had my first manuscript. And he emailed one day and said, don't you give up. This is really good. So I decided to submit it one more time. My husband had finally found a new job. We had moved. Some things were happening. And while that manuscript was being considered, my 40-year-old sister 6 years ago took her life and died by suicide. And that completely rocked my world. I had lived through infertility, chronic illness, divorce. I had lived through struggles in my marriage, struggles with being a mom. I had lived through some pretty tough things. But losing Meg was, and probably is at some level, the hardest thing that I have experienced. And as you see her headstone, there's a Les Mis quote on there. It's to love another person is to see the face of God. And Meg loved me fiercely. She believed in the book that I was trying to get published, and we had been through everything together. And she loved me so fiercely that it was like a fuel in my life. And I loved her. And I felt like I knew her hard stuff, her good stuff, her little stuff, her big stuff, and she knew mine. And when my brother found her that day, he found her on my mom's birthday, March 11th. And that was the worst day of my life. And it changed me. Within 6 weeks of her passing, I heard from the publisher, Covenant, who now publishes my books, that they were accepting the manuscript for I Can Do Hard Things with God. And from that became the beginning of a beautiful relationship. I've been published in 7 books, but I've written 6 of them. I'm part of another compilation Christmas book called The Perfect Gift. I have 3 talks out on CD. But what's interesting about that very first book and the timing of all that, and perfect, I hope, for your audience, is the timing. God had told me to write this book. He had told me the title. He had told me what it should be in there. But at the time of Covenant contacting me, there was a story that had not happened yet. And that story needed to be told. So I repurposed and rewrote that book, reformatted it to include the very first chapter is my sister Megs' suicide. And that first chapter of that book has reached atheists, agnostics, evangelical Christians, Jews, Muslims, all over the world. That book has been found and included in church libraries of churches that are not my church. And it's really that first chapter that has opened hearts. I've heard from thousands and thousands of readers of people that have lost someone they love to suicide. And 20 years has passed and they're still not over that, because suicide death is a unique grief. So I tell that story because as all of those starts and stops happened, God couldn't tell me with those 2 rejection letters that Meg hadn't died yet. I mean, I remember going to him in prayer after both those rejections, feeling really discouraged, thinking, you know, you told me to do this. I argued with you. You said to write a book and I told you no. And then I agreed to do it. And why can't it get published? And, you know, I went through all that bargaining of, well, maybe he just wanted me to have the experience. Maybe he didn't really want it published. And it was clear that he did want it published. But he couldn't say in prayer to me, in answer to prayer, hey, Meg hasn't died yet. And I'm sensitive in telling that part of the story because I know that there are many different faiths out there that look at God and his control over what happens in our stewardships differently. But I really see that Meg's death is a stewardship. It's part of my mission. It's now, I've given over 900, almost 1,000 talks all over the world in the last 6 years. I've been to the Middle East, I've been to England, I've been all over the United States. And one thing I know is that every single person on this planet is connected to suicide, depression, and anxiety in some way. 1, they struggle themselves. 2, they love someone that does. Or 3, like our family, have already lost someone. So this is a universal story. This is not a Utah thing. This isn't it isn't a LGBT issue, a veterans issue, a teen issue. This isn't everyone's issue. And right now, especially during this COVID crisis where we're socially distancing from one another, it can be a very triggering time. Springtime is a peak season for suicide and people don't realize that. So for me, that day when Ben found Meg, this became my why. And I could see very clearly the timing. That God knew my sister was tired. You know, many people, her bishop and friends and other people wrestle with, why didn't God tell me to go over and check on her that day? And why didn't he stop it? And so what I would say is suicide is about pain, and it's about wanting pain to stop. It's not about being selfish. It's about that lie that we all can sometimes believe, which is that we would all be better without someone. And we can start to feel that, you know, when we're discouraged and struggling, it can feel like the world would be better without me. And for Meg, after a lifetime of struggling with depression, anxiety, some addiction, the abuse, residuals, learning disability, those risk factor lists are long, but so can our insulation factors be. And so in a very personal and yet very public way, the timing of my first book was divinely orchestrated. And her story, I very much see that we serve a mission together. She's often with me when I speak, and I often feel that she's with me as I'm trying to navigate things that she no longer can do, but that I can represent in her behalf. I have a stack of For the Ones, and they're for the one person that heard one of my CDs or watched one of my YouTube videos or saw me on a show or read one of my books or heard me speak, that heard me talk about her, about Meg, and how very boldly I speak about suicide. And what I really try to say, no matter what the group is, no matter what the topic is for speaking, it's this: stay in your body, because we will never be better without you. And so I guess that's what I would share, is that whatever you're trying to create, God is very clear that he needs each of us, and that he's orchestrating things. This newest CD, that this talk is how to stay in your body, in your faith, and in your marriage, because I think when we know our why, it helps. And I hear from thousands of people every week on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, that message me, and they struggle, and they're wondering what use they are. And I'm going to say there's no one that's extra. There's no one out there in the world that's the extra kid that we can do without. And yet, if you have chronic depression or anxiety like my sister Meg has, you can start to feel tired of feeling tired. And you can start to feel like you're not contributing to the world and you're of no use. And so I hope that even no matter what I'm sharing today, that this interview will be found, if it is found by one person that's feeling like they don't have anything to contribute because they've been fighting this fight for a long time and they're tired, I would say you're learning things to help other people. And so that's the very long answer of my background and my childhood. I don't just write about suicide, but I always talk about it. So I don't just speak about it, but I always talk about that. There's a way to always include it in any messaging I'm given. You know, any message that I'm giving, whatever the topic, we're all dealing with some mental health of some level. And through this COVID thing right now, I very much have felt like my list of skills to address my own health, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, are being tested. You know, I feel like I know some stuff. I've worked a long time to be my best self, and I'm being pushed. I'm being pushed to old patterns that I thought I was done with, and relationship issues that I thought I had resolved, and questions and doubts that I didn't think that I was going to have anymore. And they're all showing back up right now, right? Because we're all dealing with some vulnerability. But I can't say it any louder than I'm going to say it for the rest of my life. And that is that we're all needed. We're all interconnected. We are literally all brothers and sisters. And so when one of us is lost, everyone's lost. The day Meg's headstone was placed was the day Robin Williams was found dead. And I remember thinking, the whole world knows how our family feels today. Because here's the most happiest, successful, creative genius, Robin Williams, and now we don't have him. You know? We're not better without him. And we're not better without anyone that's listening to this. So that really has become my why in everything that I'm doing. If I'm not creating a conversation around connection and authenticity and what's really happening in our lives, the uncomfortable stuff, right? Then I'm wasting, I think, everybody's time, because there's a lot of great influencers out there, and messengers and authors and speakers and podcasters and YouTubers and all of that. If I'm not bringing a unique expression of, hey, we can talk about this in a real way, then I feel like I'm doing my mission, because I believe in the power of having those real conversations. When we can break down depression and anxiety in a real way, when we can talk about addiction in a real way, when we can talk about same-sex attraction or divorce or depression or postpartum issues of anxiety or chronic illness, whatever that is, or just self-worth. You know, I wrote a book called You Are More Than Enough, You Are Magnificent. It won Best of State. Well, listen, if you read it, it's my most personal book. If you want to know my guts, they're in there. And I was living that book as I was writing it. I jokingly would I had mapped out that book. And so I knew this is the week we're talking about beauty. This is the week we're talking about enough time. This is the week we're talking about enough faith. What do you think? Every week on Monday morning, that was during the time we were having the eclipses and the fires and the earthquakes and all that was happening. I remember thinking, I don't even want to wake up every Monday, because every Monday I'd wake up to write that week's chapter. And that's exactly where I felt like I was the most vulnerable. So that's definitely where I try to message from. I mean, I don't go on TV or YouTube or radio or even speak from a place of I've got this all figured out. I feel like what I try to bring to the table is I'm willing to have the conversation with you. And I'm willing to share my faith practices in a way that hopefully they cross faith boundaries. And it's not just about what a Mormon girl would do, but that a Muslim boy would consider. And that's really my wife. And so Meg is very much with me. And she's very much a part of everything that I do, what I'll do the rest of my life. And I feel really honored, and that it's sacred ground. When I take a mic and I speak to a group, it's sacred for me. And when I record something like this, this is sacred. This is all part of this. But I also see it as a mission that can end. You know, just like my son got on a plane and came home after 2 years in Zimbabwe, some missionaries in our faith right now have come home after 2 months because of COVID. And so we're all serving a mission. Mine just happens to look like this right now. And so, but I definitely feel like everything I've lived is part of what's happening now.
I love that. And I'm glad that you mentioned the sacred ground too. I think it was Boyd K. Packer that said the heart upon which we teach is sacred ground. Like, we need to be very cautious with our words to our children and to anybody that we're trying to inspire and teach, because that is sacred ground. So that's powerful. And the cool thing is, everything that you just shared was like my outline for my questions. So you are totally in tune. But what's cool is you can look back at your life and you see exactly all of these things that have created who you are today, and this mission that you feel like you are daily, step by step on. I wanted to do a speed round of questions for you.
Okay.
And so this is a getting to know you and a few more little questions that hopefully people can like draw some information and inspiration from, and then we'll end with your final mantra, your final message. But okay, so we're going to jump around. So number one, favorite color. That's supposed to be the easy one.
I know. My daughter asks me this all the time, and she's stopped asking it. I would say currently right now, it's blush pink, but it was for the last few years white. So
that's perfect, because your little graphic at the end has some blush pink in there. So again,
yes. Okay.
Okay, do you have a mantra?
I would probably say I glory in my Jesus.
I love that. I love that scripture.
Because he's my Jesus, you know, and when I remember that, then I can glory wherever I'm at and whatever I'm doing. And it's a reminder that he's mine. He's personal for me. And when he and I are connecting, then we can do anything.
That's awesome. I love that one. Okay, favorite movie.
Favorite movie probably of all times is a tie.
Oh, favorite movies.
My two favorite movies of all time are probably, if I had to choose one, it would be It's a Wonderful Life. I will watch that. It doesn't matter what month of the year it is. I will always watch that and feel inspired. And I was able to work on a book called The Decision That Changed My Life with some amazing well-known people, including Janice Cap Perry and Ardith Cap and T.C. Christensen. And T.C. Christensen is a well-known, world-renowned filmmaker who's done 17 Miracles, Ephraim's Rescue, Love Kennedy, and The Fighting Preacher, which I have a small part in the opening scene. So if you've watched The Fighting Preacher, anyways, when I sat down to write T.C.'s story for that book, I wanted to get the heart of why he was a filmmaker and his inspiration and who he admires the most and tries to model his career after is Frank Capra, who wrote and did It's a Wonderful Life. So immediately TC and I are fast friends because we both trust the same guy. Close second to that would be Sense and Sensibility.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You're a classic. You are a classic soul. Hey, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
Well, I would say I would love to live wherever my family's living. There is a part of my heart and soul that feels like it's going to make me emotional, that I've always wanted to be in Africa. So when my son was 2, so it had taken 7 years to have him. And so when he was 2, I started to say to him, Cameron, if Heavenly Father calls you on a mission to Africa, I'm going to go with you, which is crazy because fast forward, he was sent to Africa on his mission. But I've never lived there. But I feel like part of my heart was sent there for 2 years and never came back. So I would say Africa. If I could live anywhere, maybe I don't want to spend the rest of my life there, but I definitely hope I have the opportunity.
Spend some time. Awesome. What's your heritage?
So I was praying I'd have 4% African something in me, and I don't. I am very Irish and German and English, but there is some Native American in me, and there's 7% from the Iraqi Saudi area. So I always tell my husband when I get sassy that it's my 7% coming out.
Yep. That's awesome. Yay for heritage.
Yeah.
Favorite animal?
Pig. I used to raise pigs, and so I'm sure your viewers I have some people that listen to every interview. They find every interview. I don't know how they find them because I've lost track of how many podcast interviews and interviews I've given, but I don't know if I've ever been asked that question. So for all of those listeners out there that like obsessively listen to all my interviews, that's a new piece of information. I used to raise pigs, and they are fabulous, and they are very clean and organized, and I am a very fastidious, organized person, and the most clean animal is a pig, which people don't realize because they think they're sloppy animals, but they're not. They eat in a certain area, they poop in a certain area, they sleep in a certain area, and they roll in the mud because that's how they control their body temperature. But you can teach a pig to walk just by the tap of a cane. So they're very intelligent.
Well, there you go. This is our homeschool 101 for today.
Exactly. A little tip.
A little tip. Okay, tell me the meaning of your name. Do you know where your name came from?
My gosh, that name. Seriously, God and I had a long conversation about this because, you know, it's a name that's either going to like ruin your career or it's going to make you famous. And I think it's probably done the former for me because people get so nervous that they're going to say it wrong. Like my college graduation, it was said wrong. When I got married in the temple, the sealer never said it right. So we jokingly say we're polygamous because the sealer said it like 7 different ways. So I'm always like, where's Ganel? Where's Ganel-Lyn? Where's, you know, anyways. So this is the story. There's some folklore. So my great grandmother's name is Ganel, and my mom's middle name is Ganel. And then my mom decided to add a hyphen in Lyn, and the Lyn is capitalized. And then I grew up without a middle name because I was of the tradition family where the maiden name becomes the middle name once you get married. So my maiden name is actually Killough, which is very, very, very Irish, Killough. So my name right now is this long. It's Ganel-Lyn Condie. It's the longest name ever. Anyways, growing up, everyone's like, well, is Lyn your middle name? No, it's my first name. And they didn't understand that a hyphen means keep it together, don't split it apart. All the English majors will know what I'm talking about. So the story is that my great grandmother was in utero. So her mother was pregnant with her, and she was the 11th child. And there was a pioneer train of wagons coming through town. And my great-great-grandmother was pregnant with my great-grandmother. And she heard a mom yell at this little girl who got out of a wagon and ran across the street And she said, Ganel, get back in the wagon. And my great-great-grandmother, this is the story now, I don't know if it's true, said, Ganel, get back in the wagon. And she said, my next child's going to be Ganel. I have never met a Ganel-Lyn on the planet. My mother and my great-grandmother are both Ganels. I have seen other Ganels. They are Hebrew, usually Hebrew-speaking Jews, and some Africans. So I'm, you know, when I pass on after a few conversations with some notable people, I will be researching the folklore of the story behind my name, because I don't know exactly what, you know, it means. So in Hebrew, it's supposedly the female version of John. So I jokingly say you can just call me John.
If you can't say Ganel-Lyn.
Yeah, you can call me John, or you can call me Cameron's mom or Brooklyn's mom.
Right.
Or when I was getting my nails done before everything got closed down, the Vietnamese nail people that I adore and love, they just call me G. So you can just call me G. But I am very easy to find on any search engine, because no one has that name. So I jokingly say Google knows exactly who you're trying to find, because if you just start typing it in, my YouTube channel, my Instagram account, my Twitter account, my Facebook pages come right up, my website. I called my mom the day I tried to reserve my URL, and I was like, thank you for naming me Ganel-Lyn. Nobody has that. So it was really easy to have.
You got them on all channels. Okay, and then let's, I want to hear who your top 3, you've created so much. You've created so much. What are your 3 most proud, what creations are you most proud of, your top 3?
Besides my 2 kids?
That can be number 1.
Okay, my kids are my top creation. For sure. I'm very proud of my first book, because it was my first, right? It was like I had never had that experience before, but I'm really grateful for You Are Magnificent, because of how personal I was willing to go and the lives that have been touched from that. And I would say that my first CD, You Are Already Walking on Water, people are still buying CDs. Most people are listening to podcasts, but I'm a fan of an actual book and an actual CD, because you can give it to someone. And to go back to why I wrote my first book, I've heard from so many readers that say my books have become their personal friend that helps validate what they're going through when no one knew what they were going through. And so when I hear that, when I hear from people that say, my neighbor's son just killed himself, what should I do? It's not about self-promotion, but I can say, go pick up this CD or this book, and you can give it to them, and they can put it by their bedside. And when they're ready, they can open it up. And hopefully through the Spirit, the words in those books or my talk on CD will connect with them in a way that helps them not feel so alone. Because when I was going through that homeschooling time, it was afterwards that I met one other mom that had been going through it at the same time. And I remember saying to her, Cherie, why didn't we talk? Like, where were you? If we had talked for one day, I would have felt validated and strengthened to do one more day. And so for me, these books and CDs, they live. You know, I'm not trying to take away from the digital format world, but you can't share a podcast the same way you can hand someone a book or a CD. And so when I hear later on from someone that says, hey, my husband died, or we lost our job, or I was diagnosed with cancer or whatever, and my neighbor bought me one of your books and gave it to me, and I took a long time to read it, but when I did, it was exactly like in the With God series, I have 3 books now. I Can Do Hard Things, I Can Forgive, and I Can Choose Joy. The second book, I Can Forgive with God, was really hard for people to want to read, because we tackle some really big forgiveness stories, you know? When I hear back later that someone's like, I finally read that chapter on sexual abuse, I didn't know anyone else was feeling that way. You know, to me, there's no greater compliment to an author than that. And so I very much love creating something that is tangible. And so I will always buy books, and I love having CDs, and my family teases me because I still buy DVDs, and I have a VHS player, and I still have VHS.
Classic all the way through. So one thing I think is incredible is during this time, during this pandemic, I think a lot of us everybody's dealing with it differently. But so much of your story has resonated with me, and hopefully so many others, that when we hit situations that we're not necessarily pleased with, sometimes we need to just calm down and realize that Heavenly Father has a hand in it. And who knows the creations that can come out of this time if we, like you said in your previous video, if we're still, and if we listen, and if we let the Spirit guide and direct us, then perhaps this is a hinge point in our life, and He's just directing us where He wants us to go. So I'm not going to say anything more than that, because I want you to whatever you feel like you want to share. I'm going to let you kind of sum this up with something that you feel inspired to share with everybody as we close. And whatever you feel like people need to know from your heart. And I'm going to put your information up here so they can connect with you. And I
would love to connect with people. I try my hardest to respond to all the messages.
And that's powerful. I think that's another thing that you teach and share is you got to talk. You got to get things out in the open and not deal with it on your own, because that's where it gets so much heavier. Yep. So can I say, first of all, thank you so much for sharing so much incredibly powerful stories with us and inspiration.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. And then I'm just going to turn the time over to you for the next few minutes to just close it up and share your last final thoughts.
Thank you.
You can go for it while I get this set up.
Okay, I'll start talking right now. I think the invitation I would give everyone, including myself, is to try to observe yourself and what's happening right now. I think that if we can get curious and observe what our life feels like is happening while it's happening, we will do a better job of hearing the voice of God talk to us about where we may be able to create. We will be gathering the lessons that we have been sent at this time to experience and learn, and we'll stay out of judgment. I think it's really important to know that we're not running a race against anyone else. And even when it looks like life has taken a huge pause, which we are going through right now, that can be such a gift of creation. It can be a time of renewal and refocus and reestablishing of what we value and clarity around what we value. Sometimes it takes, like the death of my sister or a job loss or a pandemic, to really know that what we value more than what we were spending so much time doing needs to be adjusted. And so I guess in closing, I would just say, stay as curious and observing of yourself during this time as possible. And it can be challenging to do that, especially when it feels like we're living a groundhog experience right now, where it's the day in, day out of the same quarantine, social isolating that we're doing. I believe that there is beautiful things to come and hard things to come. And that is going to require all of us to share our unique contributions. And that's going to require us to pull out of comparison so that we're not doing what everyone else is doing. I think that when we try to hyper focus on God's voice in our life and drown out the distraction of the world, then He can tell us what it is that we may have to offer that we've been hiding. And it won't be perfect, and that's okay. No book I've written is perfect. No CD I've recorded is perfect. No live TV interview I've given has been perfect. But that's okay. That's our authentic, unique contribution. And it's that offering that is our fruit. It's not measured in whatever we think is the harvest. And I think it's the trying that God is most joyful about, that He wants to take our offering and He wants to help co-create with us. And so I guess that's my invitation, is instead of trying to have your offering be perfect, just start the process of the offering. And then you will see where God can take His hand and touch your offering and consecrate it and expand it. And sometimes we won't see for many years where our offering or our seeds have grown and blessed someone else's life. But I hope that we each get glimpses of those. I know I get them on the hard days, when I feel discouraged, or that what I've offered isn't enough or is so imperfect. Those are the days usually someone messages me randomly or posts on one of my social media platforms about how my offering has touched their life, whether it's a post or a talk or a book that I've given. And so I would just say that if you have someone in your life that you're admiring that has helped you or blessed you, reach out to them and thank them. They may be a creator that needs to hear that their creation blessed your life, and then hopefully you'll receive the same in return. Thanks for having me today. This has been just such a gift for me in the middle of all this pandemic to have this conversation. It's uplifted my spirits, and I hope that it has blessed someone else's life too.